Welcome to the Transform podcast series, hosted by Vercium, a learning and development organisation specialising in medical affairs. Each episode, we will explore different topics with our Vercium team and expert guests to bring you the latest thinking in learning and development. In today's episode, the team will be discussing the role of field medical and how to maximise its value within healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry.
Hi, it's Amanda Alexander from Vercium here, and I'm talking with the director of Vercium, Lee Hallworth. And today we are talking about the value of field medical. So what does that mean and why is it important? Lee.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for having me. Well, I think the value of field medical in the last decade has significantly increased. You only have to look at the resources aligned to medical generally in terms of how it's grown, in terms of the numbers of people that are working in. I mean, every year we go back and there's so many, the teams that we work with are so much bigger, expanding all the time. And there's a lot more skills. There's a lot more complexity to the skills. They're better trained. And they're better equipped to go out into the field. So I think the value that they add has to, increase. However, I do think in recent times we're on the precipice, having worked with many of the multinational global companies, that we're now about to step into this space of the next generation of medical affairs evolution, which is understanding their value beyond the data to really achieve something which a lot of companies have been trying to aspire to achieve which is to be a true partner of choice, both internally and externally.
So when you say, so there's something that you said there, which is understanding their value beyond the data. So could you explain to us what you mean by that phrase, value beyond the data?
Yeah, so when you work with medical affairs, everything appears to be about the data. When we're doing presentation skills and we move from someone presenting something that's non-data related and then they move to something that's data related, we see pretty much a seismic shift in their state. And I think it's almost like if I don't understand this data, then I'm not doing my job properly, or I can't communicate this data well, I'm not doing my job properly, or I don't like this data, then I don't feel confident about my role and who I'm representing and so on and so forth. But for me, there is so much more that people working in medical affairs can do in terms of the value they add. And I think they're seeing that now, that's beyond the data. And that is about them being themselves and understanding their role and understanding their position in the world.
I almost want to kind of create something with MSL 2.0 beyond the data. It feels like that, doesn't it? It feels like that.
Yeah, it does. And so you sounded a bit like a film trailer then. And the way I see medical is a bit like a film. In fact, there's a film that, and I actually made a slide out of this, and it really resonates really well with field medical when I show this. And we play a part of highlighting the value that field medical bring, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But let me tell you about this film piece first. So it's an Avengers film, and they've got like Iron Man and Thor and the Hulk, and there's this part where Thor needs to create a new hammer. And so to do that, he has to basically get two planet-sized machines and pull them together to recreate this hammer to kill this new, big, powerful enemy. And I see field medical a bit like that. So on one side, they've got this machine, which is the industry, the organization, which is enormous that they represent. And then on the other side, you've got the healthcare system, which is also enormous. And you've got Thor bringing these two things together using all his might. And one of the exercises we do sometimes when we're working with medical teams is say, what would happen if you didn't exist? Because how would the healthcare system and industry work together well. And really then that catastrophizing mindset really makes them understand and believe their value. But they still have that value associated to the data because that's what they feel it is. But it's not. So the other thing is, if you get a new MSL who feels they don't know the data well, they're very reluctant and reticent to interact and engage as much as they should. Well, actually, I think they're in the best position because sorry, you were saying?
No, I was just going, why? I was so, why?
Well, I think they're in the best position because they're more curious. They're not so beholden to the data that they can go out and just genuinely explore with authenticity and say, well, I'm new. Tell me about, what your experience is of this was what the data says. How is that playing out in the real world? And I think that brings refreshing conversations. And I think even the most senior of KOLs often enjoy those. And they enjoy it because they're exploring. And I think there's two roles that people working in medical affairs often have to engage in. One is that educator, where they know the data so well, they can help and support. And then the other one is the explorer. And that explorer is almost an obligation for that next evolution of medicine development. Because working at that cutting edge, that exploring the unmet need is vital. And that's value. I think that is valuable not only to patients who are going to benefit from this in the long run, but it's also valuable to the thought leader, KOL, HCP at the time. Not because they just enjoy the conversation, but they have an awareness of what they're partaking in. So that's the first value that I think perhaps is nothing to do necessarily directly with the data.
Yeah, interesting. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about your Thor analogy, and I'm thinking as well as the two worlds that the MSL as Thor is bringing together, they're also bringing together these two roles as educator and explorer, those two things that they're melding together.
Yeah, and if they step into that explorer space more often, so it's hard to do. It's actually hard to do, but I think if they do, there's much more value associated to it. So if I can just explain how to step in, we work with teams to step in and out of those two spaces. So first of all, the education's got to be applied where it matters. So getting the conversation to the heart of where it matters is useful, but then letting go. So you've got this kind of epistemic, pre-prepared curiosity to know where the physician sits in terms of the data that you're presenting, perhaps. But then it's, well, let's explore that space and see where that takes us. So that's a kind of almost a letting go of the data and exploring where that goes. And this is a different type of curiosity. It's almost like that childlike or new field medical, straight out of med school and into the role, which is really, really valuable. But then using the data really well within that space, if applicable. And so I think that then in itself brings what is massively missing in terms of the future potential for medical affairs, which is high value insights. So we work with several of the top 10 global pharmaceutical companies, medical affairs teams, and all of them say we don't have enough high value insights being captured, generated. And it's because it's an input, insights is an input output model. And so people aren't being brave enough to step away from the data, to step into that space, to create them insights that live in that space, that live in that dialogue when you're that curious.
So Lee, I want to ask you something, and I know we will cover this in more detail on another chat. So for people listening who might not have heard that phrase high value insights before, how would you describe a high value insight?
Well, that's a really, really interesting question, and it probably is another podcast within itself. But let me do my best. Yeah. So for me, the difference between the vast majority of insights that are captured and a high value insight that is captured is sentiment, which is the why, the feeling, the emotion, the belief behind a decision. behind an action. What is captured 95% of the time is the action, what is happening, how the doctor is thinking, believing, what they're aligned to, what they're not aligned to. But the why they're doing something, and maybe the why behind that, that's where the high value is. Because that then gives insights into, well, what are we not looking at?
Which ultimately creates what?
That deeper understanding. I mean, I think if you look at medicine and medical affairs and the development of medicine, it's constantly moving forward. It's constantly like, what's next? Looking at what's next. How can we make things better? That unmet need. And so that's where the conversation needs to always be.
So in my head, there's a little kind of timeline going on. So you've got an MSL who understands their value beyond the data, which means they're able to let go and use their innate childlike curiosity. And that means they're able to have a conversation with their HCPs, which is then more likely to create not just an insight, but a high value insight, something that will actually move medical forward and create ultimately better results for patients. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you've captured that really succinctly. I think that's absolutely right, but it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Because, and here's the reason why. So I think it might, on the face of it, where we've got to so far, it might appear that we're almost being harsh on medical affairs professionals. We're not. They're a product of their environment, and in their environment, there's a lot of resources, a lot of energy, there's a lot of voice around the data and how to disseminate it, how to share it, a lot. And there's less so around the importance of and what happens with insights. So insights get put into a machine, hundreds of them every month, thousands globally, and they get sent off, and very, very rarely does it come back to an individual and they say, well, you said this, can we go through that a bit more? And what happened? We need to explore that space. And so it becomes a numbers game, and so there's no feedback. So if you put that into context, so if you look at a carpenter that builds something and can see, feel, touch, smell the wood, they know what they've done, and so they get better and better and better at it. Whereas that feedback loop doesn't exist in medical affairs, or very, very rarely. And I know we're going to be talking about that with somebody else on another podcast in the future. But this is the world that they live in. And I think we have a responsibility, leaders have a responsibility to understand, explain, and share continuously with medical affairs professionals that their value is beyond the data. And if they do that, then they're more likely to get the outputs that they want.
Excellent. Beautifully summarised. Thank you. Thanks, Lee.
You're welcome. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you found it useful, please consider sharing with a colleague. To learn more about what we do or listen to further podcasts, please visit our website, vercium.com.